Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Hang on a second, I need to get here into the slide view. So I get to present, I get to present to you about this visualization project that we've been doing together in Marin County, which is really an exciting opportunity on so many fronts. A research project, an engagement project, and a project in how scientists, technical experts, communications experts, social scientists, politicians could work together to make something really unique and novel happening. I'm hearing someone else's typing in the background. Wondering if you could mute yourself, whoever that is. Anyway, so I just want to tell you about this project, and to begin to just say thank you, not just to you who are all listening today, but to the many project partners. And in particular, I want to point to Krista Daniels, who's associated with Antioch University, because she was a research collaborator on this project, and much of the work that I'll present to you is focused on the work that she and I did together. So she deserves big kudos. But you see here, there's the County of Marin, there's climate access, outreach and engagement experts extraordinaire. FEMA funded the project, and then Autodesk and Owleyes are two technology partners who helped us realize this visualization in place, which I will now share with you what that looked like. So, quick overview. I want to tell you a little bit about where we did this work and what the context is in which we did it, so you see how it fits seamlessly into the ongoing adaptation planning process of Marin County. I'll share with you the research questions, how we approached it, and what we found, and then sort of come back to the larger question of, can visualization actually help us in community engagement? As you probably all are struggling with, this is an ongoing debate in the scientific community and the outreach community. How do we increase people's level of concern and interest in climate change impacts and get them actually not just to have more interest or have greater concern, but actually move them to action? Can we say something about whether visualization can help? That's sort of the core of what this whole study is about. So a little bit of background on Marin and what they're doing. I saw a number of names of people who are from the East Coast, so I just had to put this, this slide in here so you know where we're playing. In California, we're talking about Northern California, and in particular the Bay Area. You see here Mill Valley in the middle of this second map, and the owl location where we place this visualization device is just a little bit off of 101 on a bike path and walking path that is highly frequented by local residents. So we wanted it to be in a location where a lot of people would be able to come take a look and see what they think and feel about that particular, or the visualization of that future. So just to orient you, that's where we played. And this is what it looks like now. This is not any kind of made up visualization. This is what it really looks like during either a sunny day, high tide, king tide, or on the right hand side here, a picture of a storm in December 2014, right, that just put everything underwater. And so this is stuff that they already experienced at this time. We learned quite a bit, as you will hear in a moment, that this truly disrupts all the people who live a little bit further up on the hill and who can't get to work on 101, who can't get into San Francisco or go to work, go to schools, go to hospitals, and whatnot. So this is truly already disruptive now. So not just a future threat, but what is that future threat? Well, here you see the projections that were specifically put together for the West Coast and for California, between 1.5 and something like 6 feet of sea level rise over this century, which is of course a humongous range. We chose a 3-foot rise, not to be sort of happily in the middle, but because 3 feet will happen at some point. And certainly the latest science tells us that that might come sooner than later. So we wanted it really to be about you know, if you will, almost like a for sure impact that will happen at some point. The only real variable is how soon will that point come. So they've recognized this clear threat in Marin County. Here's just a picture of what this king tide looks like right in the location where we placed the viewing device. This is what it would look like. I'll go back and forth a little bit just so you can see it. You know, just take that white van there in the background and see what happens. It's gone. Or, you know, the parked cars, and see what happens. They're basically well underwater with 3 feet of sea level rise. So there is a significant, you know, impact right here in this location from sea level rise, and you can see it. It's not maybe ideal. You could have, you know, many impacts even closer in and make it even more tangible for people. But this is basically the 2 scenarios that people could see. I just want to give a little bit more context for what Marin County is doing. This is an image of their sea level rise inundation map for the outer coast, and you can see that they have plenty of problems on that side. They're working on actively trying to figure out what they can do on that side. For the Bay waterfront adaptation assessment or vulnerability assessment, they're working on that as well. This is that same location I just showed you. So they're working on both sides. They have obviously very different options of what they can do, very different, not the sea level rise isn't so much of a difference as much as the impacts of what will be experienced, what is exposed, and so on and so forth. I also want to point out that while the public, you know, has experience with these ongoing nuisance flooding related experiences with storm related, erosion related issues, they're pretty much variably concerned, kind of, you know, what you would expect in most publics. It's not like top of their list by any stretch of the imagination, and they're certainly not very engaged. What you see here is an image from an earlier community meeting where, you know, maybe just sort of 30, 40 people showed up, and it's kind of like the same 30, 40 people. And I know many of you struggle with the same type of issues where always the same people show up. Can we change that? Can we make this a larger community conversation? Kate Sears, the supervisor, one of the supervisors of Marin County, is really committed to this issue. She really wants to make sea level rise and adaptation an issue for the county, and has taken the helm. So she was, you know, directly involved. Her chief of staff was directly involved in our project meetings, almost, you know, every single meeting. Her staff showed up in our team meetings, but Kate herself attended some of our meetings and participated, and wanted, you know, really gave this a reality check that many research projects don't benefit from. So I found it an extremely rewarding experience just in that way. And we can talk about that. So what do we try to get at with the research part of this project? So as I just said, can we raise people's concern about sea level rise by actually showing what it would mean in the places where it would happen? As you know, one of the #1 obstacles to people having any interest or concern about climate change is what we technically call psychological distancing. They can keep it sort of at arm's length by not letting it close in. Oh, that happens to other people, that happens to the polar bears, and it happens in, you know, other countries and in 100 years from now, right? Those are all ways in which we keep this far, far away from us. And because it's far away, we then don't have to worry about it. We can go back to our daily business. Well, can we actually show climate change and the impact of climate change in place, and thereby overcome that distance and bring it close to people? And of course, you know, what you all know is that when people experience a risk very viscerally, then there's sort of 2 possible responses. One is that, you know, they actually are mobilized to do something, to become engaged, take direct action, or, you know, be engaged in that community adaptation planning effort. Or they might just be so scared because they don't know what to do, and they might just stick their heads right back in the sand and go away. And so, you know, how can we use this visualization to actually move them to action as opposed to just scare them to death and lose them from the process? And so then what are the larger lessons we can learn from that for climate engagement. Now, what we did show them is not just those two risk scenarios that I already showed you, which is the current situation and then plus 3 feet of sea level rise in situ, but also, and this is a very important element of this, we also showed them two possible adaptation options. A seawall and a horizontal green levee, green infrastructure, comes by many names. The reason for doing that is not necessarily to get them to vote, if you will, on which one they would prefer, but we wanted them to know that there's something that can be done. It just will have different pros and cons of doing that, and that was explained to them on a sign that was next to this installation of the owls, and basically they got the option, and this is interesting here where the political process came in. We couldn't say which one do you prefer, because it felt too much to the elected officials that we are voting and giving them a vote in this final thing. They wanted to know, just generally where do people lean, what's their interest, and get that or make that an incentive to come and be engaged in a larger community process. So we had the owls out for and inside this viewing device that you could see, you could turn it 360 degrees around, and it changed, the image that you saw, it changes with the landscape that is in front of you. And then after viewing a particular scenario, people could then basically answer a survey question and click on and go to the next slide, and then they would see the next scenario and they could explore that. So basically that was the setup. We had it up for 3 months. After some initial technical issues, it was working like a charm, really, and it was very busy. You'll see in a minute how many people came to look at that. We had a big media launch event to bring people's attention to it. There were repeated outreach in media to kind of really bring people, again, bring their attention to it and get them engaged. And so that is basically the experiment that we set up. This is what it looks like, one of those devices. You've seen them many times, you didn't have to put a quarter in to see anything. It was for free. We failed to put that on the sign, and I would just recommend if you ever want to do anything like it, put it on the sign. It's for free. People otherwise might just say, well, I'm walking by here, I'm running by here, I'm biking by, and I don't have a quarter with me. So, just make sure that people know that. So this is what it looks like when it's dry. It's very similar to what you earlier saw. And this is the, the first sort of king tide scenario that they saw, and then they would see one more, as I already showed you. Here are the two adaptation response options, a seawall, and it was really a pretty amazing experience when you look through, because the seawall had to be so high you couldn't see anything anymore of what was across the street if you wanted to basically protect against the storm surge related to 3 feet of sea level rise. Alternatively, it could be this eco-berm or green, infrastructure, horizontal levee, whatever you want to call it. So basically, those were the two options. And then a fifth question asked them actually about their age, because we wanted to see if there was a difference in level of engagement by age. So I put this, I basically gave you the idea here already how we approached this owl-based survey with very simple questions. There was an audio recording that basically walked people through it of how to do it. People could leave an audio recording at the owl to basically tell us, in addition to the 5 questions, which is very limited. You can't do a heck of a lot. Can't ask 20 questions because people walk away. But we basically said, if you wanted to, tell us what you feel, tell us how you think, whatever. And we got very interesting recordings from that. We also had a few sessions of observed owl use, where basically a researcher was sitting back a little bit from the owl to just see what happened and how do people respond to it. We had separately from the owl a web page, the Hear Us Now web page that you saw earlier on the page already, also with those same visualizations, with the same survey questions. Because of the particular design of the website, we could not do a similar, a really one-to-one comparison of survey responses on the web versus survey on in situ. So we actually didn't use that information, and I don't think we got a heck of a lot. It was very difficult to use that effectively in the particular way and with the particular web design that we had. So but they were online actions, and people could, use, after they saw the information on the webpage, they could then go and do something if they wanted to. They could sign up for a community dialogue, which is what closed the whole project at the end, in which we, again, facilitated the dialogue and then had participant observation and an exit survey to understand how much that helped in terms of engaging people and keeping them interested. So let me show you what we found. It's actually quite interesting. The first thing that I wanted to show you is just how many people used the OWL, how many stopped by and started to look at that. And what's important here is that, when you look at the yellow bar here, there are about 3,700 total user sessions. And what we mean by a user session is someone came up to the OWL and started to look through it and started to click around on it. This is something that by the technology inside it, basically it records anytime somebody starts that. But some people might have just, said, oh, I'm not interested, or I have to run, or whatever, and they didn't have time and they didn't do anything further. They walked away, and then it turns off, and, so there is a drop-off, basically, between those who just started and then the people who went through each one of the questions. And you can see there's a fairly large drop-off. In other words, it is somewhat tedious for people to answer, and they can't just click through the 5 scenarios or 4 scenarios and then go home. So there's a first drop-off to where people actually answered question 1, which was about their pre-existing concern for sea level rise. Question 2 was this concern once they saw what more sea level rise could do. There's another drop-off to question 3, which was about how much interest they had in learning more about any one of the different options. Question 4 was whether or not they would want to get engaged in action, and then question 5 was the age question. So basically, after, people who stay through the first 3 questions, essentially they also stay through the rest, right? So it's the hardcore folks who go through the whole thing, about half of all that started, who, give us answers. Now, 1,500 responses, full sets of responses, is a very good set from a purely statistical research point of view, but it's important to know, right? So you lose some people, you still, over a 3-month period, can get something like 1,500 responses from this device. I also want to quickly add to this, when it says total user sessions, there are a number of people who live right in that neighborhood, and they walk their dogs there every day, or they go to school, or whatever it might be. They might have come more than once. Who knows? And they may or may not have answered every time. We don't know that. But we don't, we weren't able to in any way identify unique users, someone who only came once versus someone who maybe came 3 times. We don't know that. So it's an independent session, basically, that we have recorded here. So what do we learn about concern? People coming into this without, having seen much of anything yet other than just the current blood risk. That's basically what, what we asked them about. And we asked them, what's your level of concern about that? And what you see here is that there are definitely about not quite half that are extremely or very concerned about the risks as they are. The majority, not a vast majority, but certainly the majority is somewhat concerned about that. And then there are, about a quarter, a little more than a quarter, who basically are not very or not at all concerned about the current flood risks. That's how they came in. Then we asked them about, after they saw what it could look like with an additional 3 feet of sea level rise, this is how it changed. And just to make that a little easier, just pointing that the group that, said they're very concerned went up the most, and the group that said I'm not very concerned went down the most. So in some ways, there's, at this first level of just looking at the overall responses, you could see that there is definitely a shift in the number of people who were concerned and a shift in the ones who were not concerned, which is nice, right? We wanted to see that it actually changes their level of concern. But we did actually look at the finer statistics, and I think that's really interesting. When we examined pairs of responses, in other words, someone who answered question 1 and 2, how did they shift? And what we found, with all the statistical testing that we did, is that people who came in with a not at all or not very concern level prior to seeing sea level rise, just about the current list, they changed most significantly to a higher level of concern. And on average, they shifted by 2 levels. So if they were not at all, they went to at least somewhat. If they were, not very, they changed to very. So that's sort of the average shift, and that's the most significant change that we found. Those who came in with a higher level of concern to begin with, well, they were either most likely to stay on the same level. Some moved to a higher level even, so if they came in with somewhat or very, they might have shifted to extremely. And a very few changed to a lower level of concern. And you might say, how is that possible by any rational standard? Well, it might be that this is a kind of group that, just tunes out. It's too hard, can't deal with it, and they go no, right in front of us. Maybe it's also just, people were messing with us, could be too. This is what happens in this kind of research, so we don't know, but that's basically what we observed. But I think what's the most significant insight from this is that those who came with a low level of concern shifted the most to a higher level of concern. Exactly what you want to see. Then we asked them about their desire to learn more about the different adaptation options that they saw both, and then they said, which one do you want to learn more about? Well, a few said, I don't care, I don't want to learn any more about it. 14 said they wanted to learn more about the seawall. Then more than a quarter wanted to learn more about the ecoberm, and then the largest number said they wanted to learn more about both, and a good significant number actually wanted to learn more about those 2 options and then some. So quite a level of interest. In terms of their desired level of getting engaged in the adaptation process, there were a number that said, thank you very much, but I don't want to. A quarter about said they just wanted to, they're interested in that it's happening, but, that might be all that they're going to do. So in other words, sort of a passive watching of that process. Almost 30% wanted to learn more about what is that process. I want to, before I commit to anything, I want to at least know what's going on. About 19% said, I want to join a meeting and be part of the conversation. And the smallest group said they would actually like to take an active role, meaning, I'm considering myself a champion in my community. I'm going to walk to my neighbors. I'm going to tell them right up front, or whatever that, we didn't specify, but they basically had that choice. And so there are definitely a few very actively involved and interested members of the community. Again, here we looked at the statistics a little more closely to better understand, does concern and higher concern relate to this interest and desire to be engaged. So LOC stands for level of concern. So we compared those 2 and looked at how that related to engagement, and what we found is that the higher the level of concern, the higher the desired level of engagement. Interestingly, and you might not find this too surprising, is that those who said, I'm not at all concerned, also wanted to be engaged. Do you know anyone that might fit that? So I think that's the skeptic category. In other words, people who are very politically active and want to make sure that their voices are heard, but who are not concerned about sea level rise, who in fact think it's a big hoax or whatever. Now what's interesting is that the change in level of concern from the existing level to the sea level rise level of concern, that basically correlated very strongly with greater levels of engagement. So the more they changed in their worry, the more they wanted to get engaged, the more they wanted to take an active role or attend the meeting as opposed to just watch or get information. So very interesting that there was a change in the positive direction in terms of engagement. Now, let me say a word about age distribution of the OWL users. What you see here, based on the people who answered all the way to question 5, which was the question about age, this is the distribution. That might not be perfectly the distribution of everyone who started because, the first question wasn't the age question. So we don't know, but certainly those who made it all the way through the entire experience, this is how they fall. And you can see that sort of Gen X and baby boomers are the largest groups of people going by there. A number of people you might call the silent generation, or the matures, the oldest generation, the smallest group, a fairly high number of young kids, Generation Z, because there is a school nearby, and this is a bike path and a walking path, running path, so lots of people going by, and that was interesting to the county in terms of can they engage the youth and young people in the community a lot more than before. So we wanted to see, do we see any differences in the level of concern by age group and also in their desire to be engaged. And here's what we found. So for the concern, what we found is that the two youngest of those 5 generations and the oldest one are most concerned in terms of the percentage of extremely or very concerned. The 2 older age groups have the greatest percentage of people who are not at all concerned. So quite interesting that, you know, there is also a great not at all concerned level in that older generation. The majority is in all age groups, and I think that's, you know, not surprising. Basically, we're in that middle, not so much, somewhat, maybe, level of concern. So that's the many folks in this country, not just in Marin, who basically know it's happening, but they keep it kind of at this, you know, large, at the arm's length, keep it basically, don't maybe understand fully what's going on, or simply are not, you know, don't see it as a priority in their lives. What's interesting is that the older people, you might say people who won't be around necessarily to experience the 3 feet, but that older group showed the greatest increase in concern once they saw the sea level rise scenario. And, you know, our hypothesis, we can't really confirm this, but our hypothesis is that maybe these are the grandparents or the parents who have children, and they get that this is going to be for their children and for their grandchildren. In terms of their adaptation interests, interesting little finding that the youngest were most interested in the heart protection, the oldest were more interested in the in learning more about all adaptation options, so a much wider range. Hard to explain that, but, you know, basically that's what we found in this particular sample. In terms of engagement, a very strong correlation between age and engagement. The youngest are the largest group that doesn't want to get engaged at all. Not surprising again, right? We know this from many other surveys that young people would like to get engaged, if at all, in sort of their business-related or consumer-related choices, but not really in civic activity. Baby boomers, on the other hand, are much more likely to want to attend a meeting. That's their culture. That's what they were brought up with. The oldest generation is 3 to 4 times more likely than the others to take an active role. Again, these are the, you know, people who might have the time because they're retired, but also people who are just, you know, brought up in a culture of civic engagement much more so than our youngest folks. The 2 most likely ways in which people want to, you know, get engaged at all is basically learning more and maybe attending a meeting. Attending the meeting is the weaker one of the 2 in terms of the numbers of people who said they would like to do that. More information, a very passive way of being engaged, is the most likely option. So what can we learn from that overall and take away? Well, here you see a nice picture of one of our maturers who was very excited about this. And that is that visualization certainly works to raise people's concern, particularly for those who come in with very low concern levels and in the oldest generation. There is a clear desire to be more engaged, and I think it was good for people to hear through the media and other means what those concrete steps are and where they can go. So those who come in with high levels of concern or increase their concern are, you know, the most likely to want to be engaged in that way. Levels of engagement are generally low, but thankfully higher among the older generation, and the you know, possibility of moving people to action is, you know, I would say tentative at best. Now I want to say a word about the, you know, actually showing up at a community meeting. We did have that community dialogue a couple months after the owls were taken down, and there were more than 100 people in the room. So concerted outreach to actually bring people in through, combined efforts between Climate Access and the county and everyone and their uncle that we could find to help us do that outreach brought, more than twice or 3 times as many people in the room than what they have previously gotten. So can definitely be done. Of the people who attended that, maybe, Amy, remind me, but it was something like maybe a third or so only had seen the owls and had looked through it. So, that to me says that our outreach made the bigger effort than just the mobilization through that. But of course they're linked, right? It's hard to tease it apart because we asked people if they wanted to get engaged to give us their email, and many people did. So we did reach through this particular means a wider audience and sent the invitations to a broader audience than the county had previously been able to do. So it's, it's not an either or thing. It is the combination of using such a means with very concerted outreach efforts that made the biggest difference. And what we learned in the community dialogue is, the lesson we also learned again and again in these kinds of events, that people are relieved that there is a conversation going on, that they can share with their neighbors. We were just astonished. There were, from the whole range of concern in the room, from deniers all the way to people who are thinking, it's time to pack up and migrate, I don't know, to the Sierra Nevada. So a wide range of opinions. And, it was just an amazing opportunity to see what happens when you give people an opportunity to talk to each other, to share their experiences. And, I think that, and combined with having political leadership right there in the room, was, just a sight to behold in terms of how people found hope in just that happening. And I'll just, say one last thing. While this is going on, Kate Sears and a number of other candidates were in an election struggle at the time, and one of her political opponents showed up, and when he saw that people actually talked to each other as opposed to shouting at each other and just holding big political speeches, he just walked away because there's nothing for him to win, apparently. I mean, it was such a missed opportunity for him, but I think a very big win politically to actually engage in genuine dialogue that Kara Pike from Climate Access and I facilitated. So it was, the whole set of things that we did throughout the project. I would say the package deal is probably the biggest take home from that. But visualization had a very important impact, and probably the place where we heard it most is when people first walked up to the owl. What inevitably they would do is go, wow. It was just this realization of when it is right here, right there in this place where you live, a familiar place, that people felt the emotional impact of that. So I'll stop here and, leave it up to you to send me questions. Amy, you will maybe facilitate that, and we'll go from there.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Susie. And as a follow-on to one of the things that you said, yes, at the dialogue session that we hosted, it was very interesting. The people who turned up to the dialogue session barely overlapped with the people who had signed up on the website who had gone to visit the owl. So it was interesting to see the difference there for sure.
Many actually asked if they could have the owls back after they saw our reporting on it, and we got sort of post-hoc interested, and we only could then send them to the website, but we did that. And there's actually a small app people can play with that goes with it, so it's quite engaging from that point of view. Anyway, so back to questions, or on to questions.
Yeah, so we'll open up for Q&A now. Anyone who does have a question, please send it in the chat box, and I'll be able to ask it to Susie, or you can raise your hand and you can ask it over the phone. The first question that we have from Nathalie Augusta Filon is, very interesting research and cool tool. Are the owls available by request, or can they be rented or purchased? They can be rented or purchased, Nathalie, through the company that we partnered with, which was Owlized. If that is of interest to you or your organization, please feel free to reach out to Susie or myself. And hang on, I will just put my email address in the chat box for everyone.
Yeah, so I can maybe just say a word about that. So Allies is a startup company, now, I don't know, maybe they've been around for 3-5 years or something like that. And, they've used this particular tool with all kinds of planning issues, not just climate change. That's just a more recent sort of addition to their portfolio. They've worked on redevelopment issues in San Francisco and Napa Valley, and I don't know, I don't have the whole list of their experiences in front of me, but basically it's a relatively small company, so what I would say, yes, you can rent it or purchase it probably. To get the technical expertise to go with it is, in my mind, just as important as just the device per se. They've done, together with Autodesk, a really phenomenal job of turning photography in situ turning that or connecting that to visualization, or sorry, to sea level rise scenarios that are available for the state, and then turn that into something that you could rotate around 360, whatever. I mean, it's really phenomenal, and you need someone to check for the technical issues if you use it. But it's certainly, it's worth checking out with them.
We have a question from Ira Feldman, who seems to be Leslie Alden. Hi, Leslie. Leslie is the chief aide to Supervisor Sears that Susie was talking about before. So she's the chief of staff who was helping us as the contact, and was the person who really kind of made this happen at the county and the political level. So yeah, feel free to raise your hand if you have some insights that you want to chip in here, Leslie. Do we have another question here from
Raised her.
Ira
Feldman, i.e. Leslie, raised her hand. Go ahead.
You guys can hear me. I was just typing you another comment. Hi. It's really a funny coincidence to be here in Maryland presenting on this project and other things that we've done in Marin, and to be sitting next to Ira Feldman at lunch, who was aware not only of the Allies project, but this webinar. So we just happened to look it up, and it's like, oh, let's get on. The thing I would add in terms of conclusions and what we learned is the fact that while we have people engaged in the moment and enthusiastic and interested in staying involved, the process that we didn't really have in place as well as we should have or might have would be to have ways to keep people engaged, to give them something to do immediately, in the short term, and in the longer term. So as all of us are thinking about how to engage communities and electeds, I think that thinking through the whole process of how we build our connections outside of the usual suspects in our communities and in our regions is really critical to having longer term engagement from all sectors.
That's a really great comment, Leslie, and it gives me a question to come back to this one thing that I sort of just skipped over on the last slide, which was of the potential to move people actually to action. What can we do? And underneath that, you saw a little notice here that basically said we're going to do a follow-up study in San Mateo County and San Francisco. And in fact, that's what we're already working on. And we're very much interested there, not just in sort of repeating verbatim almost what we did in Marin, and to see whether it works in the more diverse populations or whatever, but that we actually wanted to see, can we learn more about what are the things that both block people from participating more actively, and can we then engage them? And so we will have engagement opportunities embedded right in the OWL in this next iteration, and opportunities to link from the signage to a website right there, where people can take action, and also to design the website much more effectively for getting directly involved, using social media more effectively. So we're interested in actually building that out and seeing, can it be done? And I think if the combination of raising concern and mobilization can be tied even more effectively, then I think this will be very powerful to take forward.
And let me just add one thing, that having the relationships at the community level already prepared to act and reach out is incredibly important. That's the volunteer ambassador crew. But on the other side, in managing the social media from the project side or from the government side, it's staffing. We just don't have the capacity in most government agencies to add on this incredibly important communication piece. And some are doing it really well, but I would have to say that staffing, minding this effectively is a real challenge. So being mindful of that as other organizations move forward with this sort of tool, it's great to have the tool, but then you've got to keep people going.
So that dovetails nicely with a comment from Nancy Schneider. She says that they find the same thing here in Southeast Florida, that older people, even in their 80s, are the most engaged on these issues. So that leads to a question that I would have for you, Susie. Given that it was the youngest people who were the least interested in getting organized, do you think that that's coming from political disengagement and feeling like if you did show up to a community meeting, your voice wouldn't get heard? How do you think we can get past that?
This is the exact thing that we would like to find out. What is it specifically for a particular age group or audience that, you know, what their challenge is with getting further engaged? Is it that they just don't trust it? I mean, you know, if you look at sort of the election, you know, tendencies right now of different age groups, there is a huge, at least on the Democratic side, a huge dissatisfaction with sort of establishment approaches to doing things. It would be very interesting to find out whether this translates all the way to the local level, and whether, you know, people feel just as disempowered and finding no way to really engage at the local level. And if that's the case, then that will give us very clear ideas of how that can be improved. I mean, this is, you know, this is something that simply I can't answer sort of with here's what to do, because we don't entirely understand. We have sort of generic ideas, and that needs to be tested. So what we're going to do in San Francisco and San Mateo is to actually combine the work with focus group interviews to basically better understand what are those challenges to greater engagement. And then I'll be happy to share that.
Well, and also if we would be able to have those conversations with younger people, I think that the outcomes from that would be really rich, because I know anecdotally from time that I spent down at the OWL engaging with people while they were using it, it was the young people who looked through and saw the flooding of their area that they live in, and their first response was, I guess we need to move. So a lot of young people immediately went for retreat as their first option, as different to trying to adapt and then maybe thinking about retreat.
Yeah, I mean, we found that also in the community dialogue, just and you know, I want to say just how despairing many people already are. You know, they're considering themselves sort of living right now in what soon will be ghost towns. I mean, that was, you know, a quote from somebody living up a little bit higher up in the mountains, but who was dependent on an accessible access road to and from work. And so, you know, people have very stark feelings and opinions about these things already. And to engage them, you know, in sort of an authentic and real way, not just to, oh yeah, we're going to study it or something, which is of course a critically important piece of the solutions. But people are impatient, people want actions. You know, when we ask people, how soon do you think we need to start worrying about this and do something about it, they said yesterday. So there's very strong feelings that we're already behind the 8 ball, and they're impatient to see action to get underway.
And just a reminder to everyone, if you want to ask a question over the phone, please just raise your hand and we will unmute you. Another question that possibly you may be able to speak to, Leslie, if you're still on the call, or I think she may have gone. I was thinking about the way that this can be used in terms of county planning processes, because having almost 4,000 responses to a survey question of what kind of adaptation should we be thinking about in our local community is so much greater than the 20 to 30 people that normally show up to a meeting. So Susie, did you want to speak to how that can be used?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, the almost 4,000 was the people who just came. The ones who asked what they wanted to do was maybe just, about half that. But still, 2,000 versus 20 is a whole other ballgame. You're absolutely right about that. So, I think we see that already in San Mateo County, where people actually want to know specifically, how does the community feel about different options? So they're very willing to ask that question and to use this device to get input into their planning process. The timing of that particular OWL experiment is going to be, we're going to launch the OWL just prior to them coming out with the vulnerability assessment, and then we're going to use the OWL responses to feed into the planning process. And so it fits right very smoothly into a planning process. And in fact, when Krista in particular did some background research on the literature on using visualization in deliberative dialogues, and there's a little bit of literature already out there. And basically, since the 1980s, 1990s, with the advances in computer technology, visualization, animation, these tools are used increasingly in planning processes for all kinds of things. So that's a fairly well-established one. This one is rather fancy in that it shows the future in the places where it could unfold. So that's a rather unique way of applying that particular technology, but I think we're seeing it increasingly being applied because visuals just work so much better than a scientific graphic. I mean, you saw, I had in this presentation just a graphic of the sea level rise curve that's out here in this state for 3 years. Well, it hasn't moved people necessarily, but when people see it right in, in their neighborhood, it's a whole other experience.
Yeah, it really breaks down that barrier to action on climate change of not me, not here, not now. When you're standing in your community and you can see the impacts on your local bike path that you walk your dog along every day, it really makes it much more tangible, which is so important for an issue like climate change, which is so abstract a lot of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that one we've proven pretty well, that we can make it real for people and raise their concern. I think the next step is really to, can we move people more effectively to a number of different actions? So stay tuned.
All right, did we have any other questions? I'm not seeing any in the chat box. Is there anyone on the phone lines who would like to ask a question? No, okay. Karina, did you have any questions?
There is one from Natalie.
Yep. Natalie, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. You're on.
Can you hear me okay? I'm speaking through the mic.
Yes.
You're a little far away, Natalie.
All right. I just moved a little closer. I really love the presentation. It reminds me a lot, Susie, of I don't know if you're in your communications with folks in New Jersey and the Rutgers team, you learned about the New Jersey Flood Mapper, which has a few buttons where you can sort of click and see, 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot sea level rise for specific New Jersey landmarks or historical sites.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's on a web platform, and they've also seen locally here a lot of receptivity to this approach. I'm wondering, when you chose to divide the research by age demographics, I'm guessing that was primarily as a communication and engagement tactics. Are there any other case studies where there were other demographics used?
Well, the reason we did that is because Marin County was really interested in engaging different, segments of the community. Very close to this particular site is a school, and people wanted to see whether, there's a way in which they can involve essentially the people who will inherit this problem more actively, and so that's why we went with that. there could be all kinds of different ways. We originally had a screening question identified with Ed Maybach's help too, that is a good screening question to sort of get at the 6 Americas, if you will, because we thought maybe that would be helpful. In the end, we decided it's too many questions, and we might lose people, so we didn't pursue that. But I think what we found is sort of the spread of concern and the level of engagement. If you take those two together, they correspond actually quite interestingly with the 6 Americas. So it's not, it wouldn't be rocket science to try to make a connection to the categorization that Les Erowitz and Maybach use. We didn't ask anybody for a political affiliation. I think that would have been politically a lot more difficult to put in there. So, it's an interesting experiment of collaboration across sort of various, there's the science, there's the engagement expertise, there's the technical expertise, and then there's the political process that we were right in the middle of. This is not distant, lab science. This is very engaged. So there are mutual influences, and there was lots of negotiation going on of, how to do something that is scientifically accurate and defensible and unbiased, and to do something that also works in the political context. So we didn't do any different parsing out of the groups that might have responded, but I'm sure in other contexts people might feel differently and might be interested in different aspects of how to distinguish the participants.